All right, Rachel, I'm adding you in 3, 2, 1. Hey, how's it going?
Hey, how are you?
Not too bad, thanks. Thanks for waiting for this long.
Oh, sure. It's been actually really interesting to see. I haven't been on your channel really very much before, so I was kind of interested to see what you guys are doing. And I love how it's like an open dialogue, and you're not trying to convince anyone, but just make them question themselves and see where they're coming from. It's pretty cool.
Well, thank you. I know that this contrasts a lot with other types of content that I make. And I know people are apprehensive of me because they see a video, for example, where I point out something in Islam and I'm saying this doesn't make sense. But I treat those differently than these conversations, right? So, yeah, as you said, I'm not trying to convince anybody of anything here, but I might ask questions to push back to get you to explain it a little more, if that makes sense.
Well, that's fine because I think if somebody can't, support their beliefs, then how strong are they to begin with?
Exactly. So, yeah, tell me, you're a convert, right?
Right, yeah.
So, how did that happen? And yeah, what convinced you?
Sure. So the turning point was a delicious artichoke and pea tagine. Not joking. I was raised atheist with an emphasis on science and reasoning and questioning things and making logical decisions, which I still absolutely do. I grew up in a predominantly Christian area of the Midwest, but I never had any of my questions to my friends or adults there answered satisfactorily. And a lot of times they would tell me, "You just have to have faith," which that's really not good enough for me. So in high school and university, I kind of shifted to agnosticism, and I eventually started searching for truth in religion while at the same time realizing no religion is perfect because we're all humans. And I looked through a whole bunch of stuff, and I never even considered Islam because mostly the negative portrayal in the media, and then things like at the time women couldn't drive in Saudi Arabia, and I was like, I'm a feminist. How's this going to work? But I took a comparative religion class in university that really opened my eyes to what's actually said in Islam textually, and I kind of started lazily researching for more like academic purposes. And I never considered it for my own life till I met a small community of Muslims outside the Philadelphia area, some of whom were raised in the religion, and were immigrants, naturalized citizens, and some who were born Americans and later converted. And they were just regular people and they fit right into modern society. I was like, oh, these two things can work together. That's not as alien and as strange as I was led to believe. And it was a long path, but eventually in 2015, I did convert. There was three main things that convinced me in the end. One was the status of women in Islam, both in general, but especially as a reaction to the status quo at the time that the Quran was revealed. And then scientific miracles in the Quran. There's things like cosmology, there's embryology, there's evolution that are all scriptural. And then third, the commandment to continue to learn and throughout your life, because that's something I was raised with. It's something I strongly believe in. And it's something, honestly, it's kind of a reaction to the questions I asked when I was a child, what the people couldn't answer for me. And even within, my own beliefs, I continue to evolve. I've looked at a whole bunch of different stuff, Sunni beliefs, Shia beliefs, even like Salafism, which for those who don't know is super conservative, is not my thing. But at this point today, I identify with Quranism, which rejects the Hadith, which is, I know, a very minority viewpoint, and a lot of other Muslims would not be okay with that. But yeah, that's where I am now. How's that?
Yeah, can you still hear me?
Well enough, yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right. So you said the first reason was believing in, how Islam views women and how that contrasts with how they were viewed at the time, right?
Yeah.
I have a lot that I think about that. Like, for
Sure.
example, we cannot exactly verify that that's how they were treated before Islam because we don't have a lot of historical records about it, except
Okay.
what Islam says about it. But
Mm-hmm.
let's presume that is true.
Mm-hmm.
So, what does that say about how Islam views women today compared to more progressive societies? Do you think Islam is in line with those progressive values completely?
I think a lot of it depends on the region you're talking about, because if you look at like the Middle East, for example, the answer is no. And that's actually one of the reasons why I'm currently, you know, geared more towards Quranism, because there's a lot of social issues that several Muslims don't subscribe to the same belief system that I do. For example, prohibition on women leading prayer. That's not from the Quran, that's from the Hadith. So no thanks.
So, you believe women can lead prayer?
Sure. I
Okay.
think it's fine. I understand the reasons why some people don't get into it, but a lot of it's like about Women standing in front of men. For those who don't know, when we pray, we go into certain body positions, and it would be guys looking at the bent over backsides of women, which that's their duty to not look if it's a problem for them. Like, it's not the duty of the woman to subjugate herself and go in the back and, be lesser than.
In my mind, a compromise would have been, if I was in your shoes, it would have been, she can lead prayer in front of, mahram men, like her husband and family members and so on. Like, that's what I would have thought as a Quranist. But even then, I feel like a woman bending in front of strange men would never be accepted in Islam. So do you find people with a similar interpretation as yours? Or do you see it more as a personal interpretation kind of thing?
I think one of the tricky things is nobody's raised in exactly the same way in the same place, nurture and nature. And I know that my previous social beliefs and the way I was raised inform a lot of what I do today. But I doubt that most people are going to say the same thing, and I agree that that's a lot more easier to swallow what you've come up with. But when we're taught to pray, a lot of times we're told to focus on a spot on the floor anyway. One of the reasons I was told is that there's other religions who look up to the sky when they do, and so we shouldn't imitate them. And you never know who got their information from where. It's tough to really figure that out. But if you're supposed to be looking down anyway, then what's the problem?
Oh well. Okay. I still have many questions because
Sure.
I really want to get into each one of these points. So you said about the treatment of women. So obviously, that in the Middle East, there's a lot of problems in that department. Do you think that they misunderstood Islam and that's why they're like that? They let the culture influence it, or corruption, or whatever it may be?
I've never lived there, so I can't say for sure. I did live in Morocco for about 9 months, and it was very hard. I've lived in Korea for 5 years as well, which that was actually an easy transition, but it turns out going from a first world country to a developing country is a lot different. And I was shocked, and it was difficult to walk down the street by myself. And the things that would be said to me, I was just in shock. Like, how do you think this is okay? So is it a cultural thing? Maybe. Is it misunderstanding the religion? Maybe. I think I haven't been in those societies long enough to really say for sure, and I don't want to pass a judgment on other people for that reason. So that's a tricky one, and I don't really have a good answer.
No, that's okay. I'm trying to approach it from the point of, like, you as a Muslim, how do you think the majority of the world is not following Islam the correct way, in a sense? Like, I know you wouldn't make that assertion, but do you think that?
Exactly. I'm not going to judge anybody else. I think my issue comes when other people try to restrict someone's freedom or try to condemn them, and that's my issue. So, like, when we look at Christians, there's the Westboro Baptist. Like, no, thank you. And it's another reason why Salafism was absolutely not for me. There's just so much condemnation and people shouting kufar all the time, and I think it's way too much. But
I mean,
let's see. Go ahead.
How I would think about it is, like, or this crossed my mind. If I am taking the interpretation that I find least problematic, right, and I think is, or at least has room for progressiveness and does belong in today's world with little conflict or no conflict, does that mean that the majority of the world is misled about Islam and has been for a long time? Like, for example, if I were a Quranist, a lot of people are trying to get me to ask you about that in the comments, but I don't think that's the point here. If I were a Quranist, for example, do you think that most Muslims are misled by Hadith?
I don't know that it's even misled. I think there's a lot of things you take at face value, especially if you're raised in the religion. I know, for example, when I was living in Morocco, people would tell me wild stuff, and I was like, what are you talking about? Like, where's your evidence? Who told you this? Oh, my grandfather. Well, where did he get it from? Oh, he just told me. I was like, then I would go research and find out that it's a common misunderstanding. And again, culture mixed with religion, it's hard to separate them sometimes, especially when it's the place you live in and that's what you were brought up with. So are they misled? I don't know. I think a lot of times it's you trust the people who tell you things, so you don't feel a need to investigate. I don't think that's necessarily a personal failing, especially when everyone else is doing it, and especially when everyone else is telling you the same input. There's no reason to question necessarily. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm not trying to pin blame on them specifically or
Hmm.
culture specifically or what I'm trying to think is like if people follow the hadith, they have a
Hmm.
very different interpretation of Islam than you do, right?
Yes.
And the reality is the majority of Muslims follow the hadith. They don't all agree on which hadith, but the majority are
Yeah.
Sunni and then there are Shias and then there are, sub factions of that.
Yeah.
So I can't help but think this back as a Muslim. Are most of them wrong? Or like, did God fail at revealing his message in a way that the majority misunderstood or they took the wrong way to try to understand him?
Ooh, that is a good question. So let's see. I have like a million thoughts in my head. I'm going to try to stay on topic. Feel free to
Yeah,
interrupt me if I go off.
that's fine.
Um, so one of the reasons that I am currently, you know, defining myself as a Quranist is the Quran has verses in it that says this is a complete work and you don't need anything else. So why should we take all of these accounts, secondhand accounts, third-hand accounts of what the prophet did and said, etc.? Because he was indeed a man, and I understand he's an example we're supposed to look up to, and that's fine. But it doesn't mean we have to emulate him because a lot of people feel that's akin to placing him on the same level with God. Um, did God misguide people and not reveal things adequately? I think in the Quran there's enough definite structure and rules for certain things, but enough left open to interpretation to make it applicable to all times and situations. And I think that people um, sometimes make the wrong choice. There's a saying that I've heard several times, which is that Islam is perfect, but Muslims are not. And that is absolutely true. I know that non-Muslims won't agree with the Islam is perfect part, but um, I think that may be kind of getting at the answer to your question a little bit.
Well, it's still missing this part. So
Okay.
for example, I think being a Quranist makes you a lot more pacifist, and it is why people who are Quranists tend to be more progressive to begin with, or they are converts, or they come from a background where, they already have all these traits that they're kind of superimposing on Islam, in my opinion.
Hmm.
So, if I were a Quranist, I would think most of the world is misled about what Allah really meant, right?
Hmm.
If they're following the hadith when Allah specifically said this is all you need, like this is a
Right.
perfect book. Um, so so I wouldn't try, like I wouldn't understand how did Allah miss the mark by not being able to deliver his message to the majority of humans today and historically, and
Hmm.
even within the Muslims, the majority misunderstood still. You know what I mean? Does that
Hmm.
ever cross your mind, or how do you
It
resolve
has
that?
not. And
Okay.
that's something I'd have to reflect on a bit before I could say
Okay.
something mm,
Yeah.
eloquent or even complete. Um,
No,
like I
I
said,
like that.
otherwise I'm going to end up way
Yeah.
over here, you know?
I like that. Sometimes like I've done that before too, where I don't have a conclusion about something yet, or I haven't thought about it, so I'm not
Hmm.
gonna just talk about it at the
Yeah.
moment.
I don't want
Okay.
to eat my words later.
That's fine. Even if you have to, I think that's part of growth is being willing to eat your words and learn from there.
Oh, yeah.
I still have a lot of questions, so
Sure.
stop me if if at any point you want to go. Um, so a question. Okay, I'm tempted to go down the Quranist path for a second.
Okay.
Um, so when you're trying to understand what Allah means in the Quran or what His words mean,
Hmm.
um, there is no way to understand that unless you go to some kind of translation, or even if you do understand Arabic, the Arabic is so far like removed in so many ways from today's
Right.
Arabic. You would understand what's going on, but not all the context specifically. So
Right.
aside from the language barrier and the language barrier that an Arab would have, there's a lot of context that is missing. Like sometimes
Hmm.
you would look at other verses to infer what happened and like it in meshes together. But
Yep.
there are so many stories that are just like it's just a snippet of a story, and the rest is in the ahadith or sirah. So where do you get the interpretation or context from if you leave the ahadith and sirah aside?
What a good question. I'm just going to lean over here and grab something. 1 second.
Sure.
Okay. So I have a number of different translations, and you're correct. I read everything in translation because my Arabic is restricted to a couple of greetings and being able to tell someone off for street harassing me. But
the useful stuff.
yeah, you know, the basics, the everyday things you need. So this one is my favorite. It's also the wrong direction, thickest.
Okay.
This is the Meaning of the Holy Quran Extended Study Edition presented by Yahya Emmerich. Each chapter, as well as several subsections, depending on, you know, which part we're looking at, start with, you know, the place where it was revealed, what was going on at that time, because the Quran, again, this is not for you, this is for other people watching, is not in like chronological order or anything. It's in a different order. So there's things that were revealed at different times that end up showing up at different places from different locations, you know, from different situations, and sometimes in a response to questions that the people of that time and place were asking. So it starts out kind of each chapter giving you information on that, and then it'll give a little brief introduction to, this is what this section is going to talk about, and you know, these are the things you need to look for. And then there's certain words where it'll say the translation of this has this nuance. There's extensive footnotes as well, which again comment more on the historical context, which, as you said, we can't know fully and with complete certainty, but it's what we can get. So this one I feel is the most useful for questions like that.
So these explanations or context that they put in,
Mm-hmm.
they wouldn't have gotten it from anywhere except the Sirah and Hadith and whatever other written work that isn't the Quran. So how do we take that bias? There's always going to be personal interpretation bias, and there's always going to be the bias of the scholar interpreting it. But on top of all that, there's also the bias of these secondary sources.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the part that really confused me, and I've always wanted to ask a Quranist. So how do you think that you rely on these secondary sources, but you dismiss the parts of them that you don't think are right?
Oh, well, I think the parts of them that sound a bit off is usually the stuff I go and research a bit deeper and see what people tend to say. But I think it's both the beauty and the danger of the Google age. The fact that we have so much knowledge at our fingertips, but then how do you know what's reliable and accurate? Whose bias, whose agenda are you subscribing to?
I mean, aside from the scholars, just or the people on the internet, like the text that is used to interpret like the whatever other sorts of secondary scripture, how do you eliminate that completely as a Quranist and still understand the Quran? Anyway, it could be one of those things that, like, you know, you don't need to answer on the spot, but
yeah.
I was just curious if it's something that you know, came to mind before.
No, not necessarily. I'd say I've only learned of this word like when I gave a little introduction. I guess I don't remember if I mentioned this, but there were a lot of issues that I had with the way that people would demonize certain things. I know the one we talked about was women leading prayer, but like polygyny as well, the fact that men can have all these wives but women can't, you know, for breeding purpose. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say that, but for reproductive purposes, I get how it makes sense. But you know, today doesn't really matter. LGBT issues, there's so many people who are socially progressive on so many things, but this one they say, oh, this is a sin, this is terrible, you're going straight to hell. And this is how people were made. It's not a choice, it's not a lifestyle, it's the way they are. Like, what's if you don't like it, then don't do
So
it yourself.
how do you feel about that then? So that is one more thing that always crossed my mind.
Mm-hmm.
If God truly was inclusive, and it wouldn't make sense that God would create gay people and then be like, you get an extra special test of dying alone because I don't like it when you
No.
touch genitals. If that is like, if you truly believe that God is better than that, and I did, you know, that's kind of what pushed me out of religion. God must be better than that. So how come using God's message, the majority of the Muslims in the world misunderstood that that's what he meant? Like, I would expect a little better from God.
Yeah, I think a lot of people point to the story of Lot, which the way I read it is about self-control, lawfulness, and consent, not about same-sex relationships. Which again is a minority viewpoint. I know that. But yeah, excuse me, I agree with you that there's so many either explicit or more nuanced references to peace and love and acceptance, and I think that's what I choose to focus on. And condemning or demonizing other people, I don't think we're ever going to know for sure where anyone's going to end up. For those who believe there's somewhere else we go, and there's only one being entity that can decide that. And so for the rest of us to try to cast blame or categorize people as wrong.
Okay. So you see it as a personal interpretation of what is good, right? And following that, and you think you just got to do your best and not worry about how other people interpret it, right?
Can you say it one more time? Sorry, because I was
Sure.
foolishly glancing at the comments and getting distracted.
Just ignore the comments completely.
Yeah.
That's what I do. So you think it's a personal interpretation where you get to like find a kind of an amalgam of, or like a mix of what you think is morally correct and what Allah intended to tell us, right? Or you think it aligns with what is innately morally correct, and that's the interpretation you choose?
I like the second one you said a little bit better, because
Okay.
I think I'm going to get less hate for it. But yeah, I think, like I said, there's certain parts that are left open to interpretation, and I think that's for a reason. And I think that means we're free to interpret it, and it doesn't mean I have to take someone else's viewpoint if I disagree with it, because we're both human. So why is my view any less valid than theirs?
Okay. I know there's two more points. So you said the reason why you believed Islam is from God is because of how it treated women and how much of an upgrade that was from their situation at the time, because of scientific miracles or scientific claims in the Quran that couldn't have been known otherwise.
Yep.
And an initiative to always learn, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not going to comment on the third one much.
Okay.
The second one, I still want to revisit the first one real quick.
Yep.
So a verse like, for example, I'm sure you've heard of it, the verse about wife beating, for example. How do you interpret that verse?
Okay, so I looked into that a lot. And in the end, what I found from other people who also found it very problematic was that the exact references are not to beating somebody necessarily, like abusing them, but to, reminding them and finding different ways to do it. And the exact instruction for how it's meant to be done is like with like a miswak, which is like a herbal toothbrush, like a pencil. And it's supposed to be like tappity tap, which is still a bit demeaning and what's it called? Like when you talk down to a child. Sorry?
Infantilizing.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the word that comes to mind. Yeah.
That's a good one. But it's absolutely not a permission or a incentive or anything to abuse somebody, which is definitely something that a lot of people misunderstand, misinterpret, and take way too far.
Okay.
So yeah.
I will be talking about that topic in future videos, so I'm not gonna like grill you on it.
Okay.
But,
yeah, don't give away all your content for free.
No, I do want to talk about, like, I vehemently disagree with that interpretation. Not because I want women to be beaten, but I'm saying like based on the language and based on the scholarship behind this and so on and so forth. But taking your interpretation and following from there, why do you think it only goes one way? Why isn't there a verse about the wife infantilizing the man if he doesn't listen to her advice and doesn't, after sleeping in a separate bed, still not listening and so on?
Do you want my real answer to that?
Yeah.
I think because women are smart enough to know what to do anyway. I think men need a lot more direction.
So why wouldn't, like, that is more reason to give permission to do that to the man, right?
I'm sorry, I don't understand.
So the verse says that the man can do that to the wife, right, with a miswak or something. Why isn't there a verse about the opposite? Or
so there's also a verse that says basically anything that's not made haram, like prohibited, is halal. So she's not prohibited from doing that, so she can. It just doesn't specifically lay out this is what you have to do. I think men perhaps need those rules These are the limits, these are the steps, whereas women perhaps you know, can figure it out on their own. I think that's part of the reason why there's all these things related to what you're going to get in heaven. For men, you're going to get these dark-eyed women, etc. They need all these incentives, and men are very visual. And I realize this is generalization, but um, I have evidence from my own life. You know, I think women can kind of delay gratification and not necessarily need an incentive, and can kind of, you know, figure things out a bit better. I'm not some sort of, you know, radical feminist, social justice warrior or anything by any means, but I do think there's some differences that are addressed in these ways.
I saw an interesting follow-up in the comments.
Yeah.
So if whatever is not made haram is halal, it doesn't explicitly say that women are not allowed to marry for men. So do you think that by the same logic would be halal?
Wow. I've never thought about that.
I hadn't either, to be honest.
Yeah, that's a good
Yeah.
one. Whoever asked that, good for you. Love it. Let's see. I'd have to go and look if there's anything else that talks about it, that gives any guidance. So I know. Oh, Cyrus, super chat guy.
Cyrus,
Okay,
yeah.
cool. So how should I say this? Yeah, I'd have to go and see exactly what's said, because I know that there's a verse that says to men and women equally, you know, it's better to marry a believing slave than a disbeliever, but it doesn't specifically say you can't. And then it also says for men, you know, you can marry women of the book, but it doesn't speak on women's restrictions,
Is that a
etc.
hadith or a verse you're saying?
I am pretty sure that that's in the Quran, but I could be wrong.
I haven't memorized the whole thing, but I
Yeah, me
don't
neither,
think,
by any means.
no, I don't think there's a verse about that example of like a better a Muslim slave than a disbeliever. So that
Okay,
might
I'll have to go
be,
back and check.
yeah,
I may have
that might be
misread
hadith.
something. I'll have to go
No.
back and check. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So I want to wrap this up with um where was I going with this? So what you presented, like your interpretation of how Islam views women, you still think it is consistently good, right? It's just that people are misinterpreting it, right?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of history and like ingrained traditions that mess things up a bit, or a
So
lot.
do you think, I mean, I would say, even if that were true, right?
Hmm.
I would say the author did a poor job if the case is the majority of Muslims will, um, as you put it, like they would have their biases, their culture, whatever would influence God's word to be
Hmm.
misunderstood. I would say the author wasn't explicit enough. Um, that's my opinion. But the question here is, so do you see how someone seeing this, like for example, how Islam describes the heavenly rewards for men, you know, the women, and goes into some detail about their features, be it in the Hadith or Quran, one could conclude that this is geared towards men because it clearly, like, it was just kind of a way to entice men to join the religion, not because men are visual creatures or so on.
Hmm.
Do you see that? I'm not telling you that this is the correct interpretation in your mind, but do you see where someone could be coming from if they think that?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think,
Okay, the follow up. So just to not like, I don't mean to get you to expand on that
sure.
specifically, but
Yep.
so if someone does view it that way, do you think they're disbelieving in Islam and viewing it that way because of a moral error in them, or because that's just the conclusion that, you know, people think differently? Like, do you think they're a bad person for that conclusion, or do you think, like, is there a bias in them that they want to be a disbeliever and that's why they arrived at that conclusion that this is clearly entice men rather than, you know, misunderstood?
No, I think there's a whole multitude of reasons why people might choose or not choose any particular religion. There's so many choices out there. I think people's decisions are informed by so much, and it's so subjective. Um, Anybody who's not Muslim, that's their business. Like, you never know what may happen in the future in either direction. And, you know, that doesn't mean we can't all, you know, work together, get along, etc. I just wish people could be a bit more open-minded and understanding of people who have different beliefs than themselves.
Okay, I do like that answer, but the last follow up I would have is,
Hmm.
um, Do you know, or do you think we know as a general rule? Obviously, we can't rule on who's going to hell and who's going to heaven, but as a general rule, do disbelievers go to heaven, or do they have a shot at heaven if they
A
die a
shot,
disbeliever?
sure, absolutely.
If they die a disbeliever?
Yeah, I think it's going to depend on the circumstances, but again, I'm not one who can pass a judgment on that because
Okay.
I don't know everybody's, secret actions and their thoughts and their intentions. Because I think intention counts for a lot. Because there's so many factors that limit our actions, and I don't think it's something that I can decide on. That's not my place.
Okay. So to put it simply, do you think that um, disbelievers can go to heaven based on their, like, the merit of what they did rather than just their belief in Islam or not?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, and if that is your conclusion, then a lot of what you said, makes sense, or at least it all ties together. Because
Hmm.
I find it very difficult to believe, that people are going to hell for disbelieving, and at the same time believe that Allah, a lot of people misunderstand Allah, and it's not a problem, right? Like one of
Yeah.
these has got to be a problem. But anyway, that makes sense. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm sure a
Yeah, me
lot of
too.
people watching did as well. Um, so thank you very much for joining us and having this open dialogue.
Yeah. Thank you
Yeah.
for hosting and being so, yeah, open, I think is the best word. It
Yeah.
seems like you've been through a lot, and to engage with all of this is pretty admirable.
Thank you. I can be blunt sometimes, but I'm still trying to come at it from, I do want to hear your thoughts, so I'm just going to
Hmm.
come out and say it.
Yeah,
But
that's
yeah.
fine. That's what
Yeah.
that's what I'm here for.
Yeah. Well, thanks again for joining us,
Yep,
Rachel, and
absolutely.
have a good one.
You too. Bye.
Bye bye. Okay. So it's been 2 hours, but this is going great. So I guess let's keep going.